Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul podcast. Here we are interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we're going to be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the stories and the journeys of our guests so that we can better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Really incredibly excited to have Nicky Lowe with me today as our guest on the Excitable Soul podcast, founder of Luminate Development and the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast. She is an award-winning executive coach. She's supported thousands of executives in some of the world's best-known organizations to thrive, both personally and professionally. After having her first child, Nicky experienced burnout and just totally reimagined her approach to work and motherhood. And so now she's on a mission to support career-driven women to combine their work and family life more successfully and sustainably without sacrificing their sanity or well-being. Nicky, welcome to the Excitable Soul podcast. Wonderful to have you with us.
I'm really excited to be here, James. As you know, I love your work, and every conversation we have, I come away feeling like I'm a better person for it. So I can't wait to dive into this one.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think we could basically spend the first 20 minutes of this podcast just kind of giving each other high fives because the mutual respect is definitely there. I just wanted to touch on that kind of intro before we even dive into anything else, which is it's laden with purpose. It's laden with meaning. It's laden with contribution. I wonder if you just kind of give me a sense of your reflection when you hear it out loud that way. Like what hits you, what resonates with you, what kind of stands out with you, because there's so much in that journey alone.
Yeah, I think the piece that really stood out is about that experience of burnout and
Yeah,
how it really transformed the work that I was doing, and it was such a personally strong experience, and then how that informed not only as I showed up as like a human being, but then what I did with my work. And I
yeah,
think there have been several iterations on my journey, which I'm sure we'll
yeah,
dive into. But whenever I hear that, I kind of it makes me realize that sometimes the most painful experiences often make us reflect on our purpose and inform our purpose. So that's kind of what
yeah.
my reflection was as I heard that.
And already like a kind of a powerful message for those that are kind of listening to this conversation, which, you know, purpose can be misunderstood as having to be this kind of bright, shiny, overwhelmingly hopeful and
Mm,
positive kind of guiding force in our life. And actually it can just be a meaning making mechanism within suffering.
yeah.
Like if we understand or we're able to gain insight, to gain meaningfulness from any of our experiences, especially painful ones, then that can inform how we see the world around us going forwards, and they can be as important as the really positive experiences, right?
Yeah, and I always remember somebody saying to me, "Let your mess be your message," and I loved that. I was like, yeah, it's often in those kind of messy, uncertain, like, really difficult times that we have to dig deep and reflect on that deep stuff, and that's what
Yeah.
kind of guides us through it and out the other side.
Brilliant, brilliant. I love that you've kind of already teed us up there. The kind of the deep work, the deep stuff, which, you know, the whole premise of this podcast and these conversations is, you know, we want to move beyond what people do and really explore who they are, like the foundations of what enables them to do the things that they can do. And within your introduction, there's just this kind of really beautiful balance of here's the things that I have achieved, here's some of the outcomes, this is some of what I do, and there's kind of the nuggets of who I really am that sits beneath that. So I'd really like to start by, I guess, just connecting the dots, talking about your journey to kind of uncover your sense of purpose. There's some of the moments that have really shaped who you are. You know, where do you want to begin? What kind of stands out when you reflect on that kind of timeline?
We I've You gave me the real kind of privilege of knowing you were going to ask this question beforehand. So I did some reflection, and I kind of was like, oh yeah, where would I take the dots back? And I think it makes sense to kind of go right back to the beginning and
Yeah.
reflect on my childhood. And I think a really powerful part of my childhood, and the older I'm getting, the more I realize how powerful this is and um, was that I obviously our parents shape us, significantly. And my mum and dad had a very interesting start in life in that they were both from the UK, but they met overseas. So
Oh
they
wow.
met overseas and then got married back in the UK and went back and lived overseas. So they met in Germany, um, got engaged, came back to the UK, got married, and then went and lived over in Hong Kong. So
Oh wow.
the reason I say that is I kind of wrote my life story, as most of us do unconsciously, at a very young age, that I thought that I was going to live and travel around the world. And
Yeah.
um, I suppose my horizons were quite expansive in that
Yeah.
my mum kind of went and worked in America as well when she was about 18. So for that generation, that was quite unusual. So I kind of had this expansive horizon set that you could go anywhere and kind of do
Yeah.
anything, and who knows where life will take you. So that I think informed a big part of my upbringing. I had a really kind of happy, I would say, in quotes, normal childhood.
Yeah.
Me and my
Yeah.
brother, raised in the Staffordshire, in a village in Staffordshire.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the pivotal points in my childhood that I reflected was when I was about 10. I I remember being a really overweight child at that point,
Yeah.
and that becoming very conscious and self-conscious of my physicality.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the reason that I share that is it had a very profound impact on me at that point in my life, because I was coming into that age where you became more self-conscious, and as a girl you
Yeah.
wanted to, you know, judged on your looks and your appearance.
Yeah.
And I had an amazing mum that was like total positive, unconditional regard, and, really built my self-esteem and self-worth of, who you are is amazing. And I think
Amazing.
what that did in terms of influence the kind of person I am now, and that piece about purpose, was that
Yeah.
intrinsic piece, because my external validation wasn't there, because if
Yeah.
anything, I was judged as not fitting a norm,
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
that I really went internally. So I focused very academically at that point. Like I loved learning, and
Yeah.
I got my sense of self-worth from learning.
Yeah.
So I think that really informed a big part of my purpose about learning, and growth and development came from the inside and nothing about the outside. And I think that's
That's such there's just something really incredible in at such an early age wrestling with um, expectation
mm,
and how many of us are defined by external expectation of one type or another.
yeah,
And for you to be in a position, just at 10 years old, to start to really feel the kind of the external expectation, and and it be in a kind of a negative experience. There's kind of like conflict and
yeah,
disruption, if you like. But to have almost the kind of the powerful force of, well, let's not work from the outside in, let's work from the inside out, and almost an immediate way of being able to kind of deflect that, or whether deflect is the wrong word, because we're not ever immune to it, but
yeah.
actually have a way of being able to metabolize it quickly so it doesn't permeate really deeply.
And I've got to, it's only now as a mother myself, and with kind of the benefit of hindsight, realize what an incredible job my mum did in that. I
Yeah.
remember a parent of another of one of my friends saying to my mum, "What are you feeding her? Are you giving her food too late at night?"
Oh,
And my mum very gracefully and respectfully kind of pushing that boundary back, but knowing that like I knew that that didn't matter,
yeah,
and knowing my sense of self-worth from the inside.
yeah,
And fascinating because only a few years later, when I hit puberty, the weight came off me. It was almost like it was a
yeah,
puppy fat thing, and just
yeah,
noticing how people treated me differently, and again, completely unconsciously, that piece around don't let your external be
yeah.
your sense of measure because it can fluctuate, and it's so uh
Superficial, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah, that's a
Yeah,
really great word for it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I and and so I think what it meant was I built my self-worth, as I say, from the inside, maybe not always in healthy, positive
of
ways.
course. Yeah,
Academic performance is really important to me. That learning and development, that was where I kind of gained that sense from.
yeah,
Um, and then fast forward, I went to university, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do career-wise, knew um, I was really interested. I loved business studies, and so I was
yeah,
like, I'll go off and do a business studies degree. It's varied enough that depending on what I decide to do, my dad ran his own business, so I think again unconsciously
yeah.
that had
Okay.
an impact on me. And my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and I say that at this point because that comes into play later down the line.
Yeah,
So went off to university, did this business studies degree, which was a 4-year degree with a year out in industry. And for my year out in industry, I got taken on by a technology company. They were a Silicon Valley tech company, and did a year working for them in London. Hadn't got a clue who they were at the time, um, but I was employed by an incredible guy that I think had, again, in hindsight, quite a powerful impact on me and my work. Had this phenomenal year in London, being thrown in at the deep end, um, supporting. It was a guy called Moni Pangali who headed up a sales team and had brought me in as almost a sales support for their team as an undergraduate. And
yeah,
I did the sales and marketing support for them. But he was really forward thinking and innovative, was a bit of a maverick, and basically gave me remit to organize European events, support all of their customer engagement. I mean, I got to do the most incredible things. I went, you know, I went around Europe organizing events. I'd got no background in doing this. I got to take customers sailing out across the Solent for lunch across to the Isle of Wight and back, and I would organize all these events. So I got to do some phenomenal things. But he taught me a couple of things in that was that he was always really respectful to the people on reception, to the guy who operated the lift, and kind
yeah,
of knew that importance of relationships and that everybody's important. They're a key part in the value chain, and
yeah,
to treat everybody with respect and recognize the part that they play. But also that kind of maverick approach of anything's possible, and
yeah,
you have far more potential than you even know, because he literally threw me in at the deep end. And I remember thinking, but doesn't he know like I've got no real work experience, and like I've never done any of this. But it taught me that, oh my God, yeah, I can do this, and anything
yeah,
is possible, and think outside those kind of the box of what's been done before. So I think that was a really key pivotal part of like the catalyst in my career.
yeah. And
Yeah.
interesting, sorry, Nikki, interesting just listening to you where you started on the timeline in terms of your parents and how they met and your kind of experience of my horizons were really broad and so it felt like almost anything was possible because you could live anywhere you wanted to live, you could go anywhere you wanted to go, and then fast forward you interact with this guy who created a similar experience. You use the same language there of almost freedom to do anything was possible was the phrase that you used again. So I don't know. I guess I'm listening and wondering if there's almost a connection here between these two environments that have really allowed you to thrive, but coming at different points in time.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 factors. There's that absolutely meeting people or being around people that got that mindset, and I think there's also that growth mindset in me of,
Yeah,
"Oh, so what can I do with this?" Because,
yeah,
at times it was overwhelming because I was put in situations where I hadn't got a clue,
yeah,
but because he'd got a very entrepreneurial mindset of, well, let's just try it, let's experiment. You can't get it wrong. It's like we're learning as we're doing it. And when that combined with my mindset, which is I'm always learning, give myself the space to kind of stretch myself and get
yeah,
outside my comfort zone. I think the combination of those two, and again, because often your personality and preferences is just so natural to you, you assume everybody's like that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think in the work that I do and that we do, you're gonna get exposure to all kind of different types of people. I realize that, oh no, actually that isn't necessarily everybody's mindset.
yeah. So how do you make sense of those experiences now through your expression of purpose? Like
Mm.
how have those dots connected into the way in which you see and experience the world now?
Oh, great question. So those particular dots, I think, particularly the experience with Moni Pangali, the guy who was my boss, he gave me more permission to be entrepreneurial. So my
Yeah,
dad, as I said, ran his own business and I suppose was an entrepreneur, but wasn't so about pushing the boundaries.
yeah,
In that way, he wasn't as creative and innovative, although he ran a very successful business. So I think it gave me more permission to go outside of the lines, and that actually you never know what you're going to find out when you do that. So I think definitely that piece, but I think the piece about how I was raised in terms of that inner developing my inner core. Like I love
yeah,
Pilates because developing your inner core gives you that stability to have the
yes,
flexibility. And I think
love it.
about the psychological like metaphor of that of like I developed my core really early on. I think probably more so than many people at that age because I had that experience.
Yeah,
I think it gave me more empathy for other people. It gave me more understanding into my own inner world and how I
yeah,
developed my resilience and how I found how I grounded myself when things felt uncomfortable.
yeah. I've got this image now of like what does the mental version of a reformer look like? Because I
Yeah.
love that analogy that the kind of the core stability creates a really kind of strong foundation. It helps to stabilize us, and being able to understand that kind of sense of meaning and almost thinking about how do I pay that forward? What does the contribution look like here? If the horizons are broad, if anything is possible, if entrepreneurialism means embracing new things and new people all of the time, if actually I start with what's happening for me and what do I care about internally and express that externally. I mean, what does the mental reformer look like? I mean, is
I
it is
I
it the
think it's a lot
experiences
of
in so
what
right?
you do actually, James. I think it is about that purpose, about what are your values.
Yeah,
It's almost like we talk about kind of Pilates being that core stability so we can have the flexibility of movement with integrity. Um,
yeah,
and for me, it's almost like the psychological flexibility of how do I stay in my
yeah,
integrity and navigate the challenges and the discomfort and the difficult emotions and the difficult feelings. Like what brings me back to my kind of stability and integrity. So when I do move, I don't injure myself. And
yes,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's the psychological version of that. But I think a lot of the work that you're doing is that the
yeah.
purpose, value, being values led, and being in alignment with that.
I love that you're describing there, Nikki, in terms of understanding the kind of the flexibility of movement, being able not being limited. I guess is that's part of it, isn't it? The nature of core strength is that there is a freedom of movement, and sense of purpose is the same in that regard, isn't it? It's not it's a way to unburden ourselves from a sense of limitation and to
Yeah.
create, I guess, a level of freedom around where and how do I want to be able to focus.
Yeah. And I know you'll know this more than most because not only of your work in terms of the psychological work you do, but the people that you've worked with, elite athletes and sports people. There's a physicality of it, but there's the psychological, part of that as well.
For sure. So you talked a moment ago a little bit about kind of you becoming a parent, and you reflecting now of the experiences that you had and how significant they were, and how they're informing how you want to be as a parent. So will you kind of cross the boundary for us outside of kind of how how the kind of the sense of meaning emerged from a kind of a career and opportunity perspective, and into
Yeah.
kind of how you show up with the people that matter most to you?
Well, I think there is a big leap that happened from, as I talked about, being in the technology sector. And when I graduated, I went back into that company and ended up creating a really successful corporate career. And on paper, looked phenomenal. I'd
Yeah.
got the company car, the big salary, the big bonus, the nice pension scheme, the stock shares, and all of that.
Yeah.
But over a number of years, I found my soul becoming less and less excited, James, to the point that
Yes,
I
yeah,
I was in distress and didn't realize it.
yeah,
So I was what I called a corporate prisoner. I'd found myself stuck in this corporate role.
yeah,
Was building a lifestyle around all of those benefits, but
yeah,
had a great quality of life, a- but a poor standard. No, a great standard of living, I would say, on
yes,
the exit,
yeah,
but a really poor quality of life in that I was
yeah,
deeply unhappy, but I didn't know what to do about it. So, and this was before I had my children. And I now realize what I was doing was I was burning out, and I was on my first round of nearly burning out.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I said to my husband, he wasn't my husband at the time, but is now, let's go away on holiday. So we booked to go on a 2-week holiday to the Maldives. And I thought, that'll give me some reflection time. I'll be able to
yeah,
recharge. And we were 2 weeks into we were a week into this 2-week holiday, sat in paradise, as all of the pictures you can imagine of the Maldives, gorgeous beach, crystal clear sea, just phenomenal. And
yeah.
the one morning we got a call from my brother, and he just sh just shared on this phone call, he went, "Nick, mum's died." Very suddenly, very unexpectedly, and it was 24 hours before we could get a flight out of the Maldives.
Oh wow.
So I was sat in paradise, having built this life that from the outside looked incredible, but that was a
Yeah,
key pivotal moment for me in my purpose, because I sat there and went, I can't do this anymore. I
yeah,
literally cannot go back to the life that I had. And in those 24 hours, I decided I was going to hand my notice in. And yeah, the way I describe it is that the world kept turning after that phone call, but it had shifted on its axes. So it never
yeah.
quite turned in the way that it had done before.
Can only imagine. Yeah,
And life was never the same again. And I think what that did at that moment was like viscerally connect me to, like, what is this about? Like, what am I here for? Because if it can change in that heartbeat, I've got to figure this stuff out, because I'm not, the way I'm living my life isn't working. So what is my life about? And so I
yes,
didn't know at the time. I was deeply connecting to kind of purpose. Um, and what I hadn't added in about my upbringing is I was actually raised in a very spiritual family. And again,
yeah,
I didn't know any different. So my mum's side of the family were incredibly spiritual. Like my granddad was an animal healer. My uncles and my aunts kind of incredibly spiritual. So I was always raised
yeah,
with this belief of there is something bigger, there is something more,
yes,
and you are
yes.
put on this earth for a reason, and in this lifetime, your journey is to figure out that reason and live in alignment with it. So I think my mum dying really woke me back up to that. I'd kind of lived in this kind of head associated. I'm in the corporate world. I'm climbing the corporate ladder, and I'd become disconnected from that. And in that moment, I deeply connected back to that of like, what am I here for? What is this about?
Amazing that in that moment of trauma, the immediate human reaction and response in you is to go back, is to go deeper, is to go
Mm.
down into much more foundational connection. Because we were talking about, the kind of the standard of living, it's superficial, right?
Yeah,
Superficial in
massively.
nature.
Yeah.
And actually to find the thing that's the thing that's far more grounding in you, to be able to create a sense of faith and belief in what what can come next. Like, that's the beauty of purpose for me. It's about hacking uncertainty. Like, when you look forward and you're entering a dark room and you don't know where the light switch is,
Yeah.
like, purpose isn't the light switch. It's not like you flick it on and all of a sudden everything is illuminated in front of you, but it's definitely the spotlight on your phone. So you can kind of
Yeah.
look around in the dark room and go, "Ooh, yeah, that bit over there, let's head towards that."
I love that as a metaphor. I think that's really powerful. Yeah, because it doesn't make everything perfect and simple, but it gives you something to navigate it by. So yeah, I think that is such a beautiful metaphor.
But also this sense of something bigger than you.
Mm.
Whatever that is, and then that the kind of previous conversations and speaking with people, they've talked about this idea of service beyond me, something that's beyond my self-interest, which is, a powerful part of the impact of purpose, because it creates that sense of, self and self-worth, in that if I make a contribution to something that I really care about, then actually that feels real. It
Yeah,
feels real to me. And
and
it's almost like
I
you were in
also
that moment going, where's the realness?
yeah. And I think it also gives me, and I know that with the work that you did with the energy project, you'll get this, that it it taps into an energetic source for me. So I always think about, particularly having experienced burnout, which I know we haven't kind of come onto yet, that I'm really curious about energy, about where do we get it from? How do we sustain it? Um, I always think about energy in terms of three levels, like what can I do in myself to support my energy? Nutrition, movement, sleep, that
Yeah,
self piece. Then I think about support, like whose support do I need around me? And before we hit record, we talked about like the teams that we're building around us and how
yeah,
amazing it is to have their support. And then I also think about this source support, whatever
yeah,
that might mean for people, whether it is a religious or a spiritual or just that sense that there's a bigger picture. And for me, there's that I lean into that energy when I'm in those uncertain times. It's like I can trust that it's not just me navigating this. It's like,
yes,
and that I find really reassuring, particularly in those uncertain times.
yeah. I love the language that you're using. I feel I can trust that. If somebody said point to it, if somebody said measure it, if somebody said, the usual things that we get shot down with when we're trying to help people really connect themselves with how to be at their best, especially in an organizational context. Actually, what you're saying is, in the most difficult moments, the things that you can't measure are the things that you can absolutely trust, because there's an
Yeah.
intuition there.
Yeah. And that was that visceral response when I was sat on that beach in the Maldives, that none of it made sense. So the situation of that call didn't make sense, but then my reaction to it, my as I say, is now my husband, but at the time was my partner. We just brought a farmhouse that we were renovating, and for me to go, I'm stepping away from my corporate career, like the color drained out of his face, because he was like, "What? We haven't planned
Yeah.
this. We've not."
And there goes the house.
Yeah, yeah, and everybody thought I was crazy, like, "What? You're walking away from your big corporate career to
Yeah,
do you don't know yet what?" But
yeah,
I'd got a like, an inkling, and I was just trusting the feeling. I was, what that experience did, as I said, it shifted me on my axes. I'd been very head associated. I'd been very logical, rational. And I kind of was like, well, that has not helped me. And again, this wasn't a conscious response, but I went
yeah,
very visceral, like what feels good, what feels right. I will just take
yeah,
the next step towards that and trust that
yeah,
it's going to take me somewhere. And that's really the path that I went on to now do the work that I do. Um,
yeah. Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So, you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times in the conversation so far, Nikki. There's definitely, that was a really significant moment on the beach in the
Mhm.
Maldives, but there's also a really significant moment around burnout for you, and
Yeah.
how that has, I guess, even further deepened the connection and conviction to the type of work and impact that you want to create in the world around you?
Yeah. So when I was experienced kind of the burnout in the corporate world, I'd kind of put it down to, oh, it's just being in a corporate environment. Like if I
Yeah,
remove myself from that, I, you know, I'll be able to flourish. And to a degree that was true. But what I've learned over that journey is that I, I set up my own business after the experience in the Maldives. I retrained as an exec coach, set up my own business, and that was 18 years ago now, and was running, built my business up to be really successful. And then we got married and we decided to start a family. And I thought I was in a great place to kind of do that. Everything just felt right. And I totally underestimated the impact of becoming a parent and that
yeah,
transition, and then trying to hold the identities of my work identity and my parent identity. And
yeah,
what it meant was I'd approached it. I was trying to work like I didn't have children, and I was trying to parent like I didn't have work. And
yeah,
it led to a year after having my first child, my son, um, I I literally burnt out. I didn't know it was burnout at the time. I just became very unwell to the point that I was just struggling to get out of bed. I'd be playing
yeah,
with my son on the floor and struggling to get up off the floor. And I kept going to the doctors going, something's not right. I really don't feel right. And they
yeah,
kept doing blood tests and they were like, no, you're absolutely fine. You're just a new parent. All new parents are tired. And
yeah,
I knew every cell in my body literally felt fatigued. It wasn't the tiredness that you get like if you've just not had a good night's sleep. And by that point, my son was actually sleeping through. So I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I started to think, well, maybe I've got a rare illness that like nobody knows what it is. And I ended up finding an incredible lady who's a functional medicine practitioner that did different tests on me and ended up diagnosing me with, it was then called adrenal fatigue. It's not called that anymore. They call it HPA axis dysregulation. But effectively, I'd burnt my adrenal system out.
yes,
And I kind of had this really profound moment again where I was like, how the hell has that happened? With everything I know, like,
yeah,
how would that happen? I'm a coach. I help people with high performance. I know,
yeah,
like, so I was like, obviously I didn't do enough self-care. Obviously I didn't do enough yoga. Obviously I didn't eat enough avocados. There was that kind of mindset that went into place, but it meant I got fiercely curious, James, like fiercely
yeah,
curious. Because I was like, if I can't understand how it's happened, how can I stop it happening again? And that
yeah,
really set me off on this journey that I've been on really for the last decade of understanding what sustainable performance is, sustainable
yeah,
kind of energy, and how we've really come to connect over that time.
yeah,
Um, and that has been a really profound part of my purpose because what I've discovered on that journey has been life changing for me, but also has meant that I want to share that with more people because I think far too many people are on that brink of burnout or just a
yeah,
breath away from it and may not realize it, or if they do, they don't know what to do about it, or they're blaming themselves. Whereas I've come to realize, yes, there are kind of individual factors, so the psychobiological, but there are so many systemic factors in this as well. So
yes,
that kind of psychosocial and
yeah.
how those interplay. And that's really where, so that experience was really profound.
And let's just pause on a couple of those points here. Like adrenal fatigue,
Mhm.
that is your fight or flight system in your body. You burned it out.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
like let's just for the people who are listening here, let's just take a moment for that's the survival mechanism within your system was getting revved so hard for so long, you broke it. And it's
Yeah.
one of the most, it's one of the most deeply important mechanisms in your human system. That's how hard you were going. So people
Yeah.
need to kind of get the context here of that's how hard you're pushing to do everything. And
Yeah.
then the second thing there that was, equally just kind of stood out hard was um, this sense of I knew it. I knew what I should be doing. I knew how I should be. I knew what it takes to perform, and the gap between knowing and doing, right? And
Mhm.
how often do we confuse the fact that we know something into doing something about it? And so awareness is only the first part, isn't it? Awareness is it's also then about
Absolutely.
commitment to
And I
action.
think the important part that links in with this purpose conversation is I knew it in my head, but I wasn't connecting it to my body.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I know the theory, and I can sit down and meditate for 10 minutes, but my body wasn't meditating. My head was like, we're here. I'd
Yeah.
take a relaxing bath, but I'd be like, it's not the perfect temperature and this room needs
Yeah.
tidying. So you can do the activities and tick it off. But unless you connect with your body and really
Yeah.
get into that somatic intelligence of
Yeah.
what is
Brilliant.
the wisdom in my body. And I recently interviewed our kind of mutual connection, Jean
Yeah.
Gomes, around his
Yeah.
work on interoception and the
Yeah.
power of what our bodies are telling us and how much data are we actually tuned into.
Yeah.
You know, John gave me so many insights around that I'm like, oh, yeah,
Well, I think the simplest and most powerful insight around John's work for me was that the kind of the science of interoception is simply the body is giving you information every second of every day, but it's giving you billions of bits of data every second of every day. Your brain is getting that information. How aware are you of that data? And how are you choosing to utilize it?
yeah,
Billions of bits of data that we're just ignoring or suppressing. Imagine what's possible when you start to open that up. And I think for me, the power of purpose and the way that kind of I've described this and kind of debated it with John has been purpose creates a connection between intellectual clarity and emotional conviction.
yeah, love
It's
that.
not one overriding the other. It's how those two things can interplay and create focus and direction.
Yeah,
And that is enabling you to be able to take all of the information that you've got to hand and make sense of it in a meaningful way. And what do we mean by meaningful? We just mean important. We just mean significant.
yeah. Love that. And it kind of loops, making me loop back to what we said right at the beginning about those early childhood experiences for me, connected me to my kind of intrinsic kind of
Yeah,
motivation, because I think the world gives us so much information and tells us what's important and what we should be focusing on and what we should be doing at any moment. But the real truth comes from the body, not because we're
yeah,
going to get kind of pulled in so many different directions. And it's about kind of putting your hand back on your heart and going, okay, I'm listening to all of that, but this is what's important. This is
yeah,
what my body's telling me is needed right now. And
yeah,
I find the more I can do that, the more I'm in alignment with my own truth and my own kind of yeah, integrity.
yeah. Wow. I mean, just even in this short space of time, Nikki, the connecting of the dots of the journey that you've been on, but also that sense of understanding purpose for you. Like what does real meaning look like, and being able to create the shift from kind of superficial to internal
Yeah.
and access that, but also what that then has created in terms of leaps of faith. So leap of faith of giving up a whole load of stuff that nobody thought that you would be able to give up, to go and do something completely different, to put yourself in a position where as a new mum, having to just reimagine the world around you and how you exist within it. Like in those moments when you're trying to be as safe and trying to be as secure as you possibly can, yet again going, nah, something's got to change, something's got to be different here
Yeah.
because this just isn't okay. And in order to do that, making that connection between, kind of the cerebral and the soulful is incredible. I'm wondering if I'm wondering what the kind of the words of wisdom would be from you to those that are listening in terms of um, that sense of knowing but not doing, that sense of having to have these massive disruptive moments
Mm,
in order to kind of create the clarity for that shift. I know you now, and I know that you don't need those moments to be reflecting in a way that drives those same level of kind of changes. So how can we help those that are listening almost not have to suffer the trauma to get to the same outcome? Like what can they be doing now to kind of take the benefit,
great
if you like?
question. I think for me, with my tendencies, so what I learned through those burnout kind of experiences was it's not the environment that I'm in, it's how I approach my environments that I have to
Yeah,
pay
okay.
attention to. Because it's almost like you put me in any environment and I can be predisposed to burnout. I've got high drive, high conscientiousness, um, uh, I'm empathetic. So, like all of these things, like I'm picking up everything. I want to rescue everybody. I want to achieve so much,
Yeah.
and I don't want to let anybody
I can
down.
do it all brilliantly
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. So I've got this kind of superwoman tendency if I'm not careful, which is why I kind of rev up my adrenaline system
Yeah.
and can get
Yeah.
stuck in that chronic stress. You know, we're meant to have those acute stresses, but the chronic
Yeah. Yeah.
stress is what I can easily get stuck in and then not pay attention to my body because I'm just like, I'm locked in. So what I've learned is tending to my nervous system and really making sure that I'm not just hitting my drive and threat system, which is drive, get stuff done and get the dopamine hit. And like I'm ambitious, get stuff done. But then I can very much slip into my threat system of, oh, there's not enough time. How am I going to do
Yeah.
everything? So I really pay attention to dropping into my soothing system. So getting in that oxytocin and the opiates to really soothe my nervous system. And so I build in practices. So they're daily, weekly, monthly practices that really just drop me into really being back connected to my body is the honest, you know, getting
Yeah.
into calming my nervous system, being able to listen to my body and create those almost like pockets of possibility for me to tune into
Yeah.
to my body. Because as we said, often we have those massive disruptive moments, and we often have those because we're not listening to the little whispers along the way that are giving
Yeah.
us the
I love that.
data.
Yeah.
And so I've consciously almost curated in my life the how do I slow down? How do I go quiet to listen to those whispers? Because that will give me
Yeah.
powerful information.
Yeah. Amazing. And the level of intention um, required to create the action associated with that is, I think, it is something that we can all actually own and that we can all do something about and with. You know,
Yeah.
the level of insight you have over what you need because of the journey that you've been on is, you know, is really, really powerful. But even just from the very beginning, just turning around saying, what moments are you creating to be able to soothe yourself anywhere at any point in time? Because what's the cost of
Yeah.
not?
And
That's,
as
you know,
we know, working with
that's
high
huge.
performers, you know, that is the difficult bit. You know, it sounds like it's, you know, it's like rest and recovery. We don't like
Yeah.
to do those because it feels like it's, you know, we're wasting time. But it's like, oh no, but that's where the power happens.
Yeah. And so if you kind of translate that back up into fueling your purpose, Nikki, how do those moments then help you connect to that kind of that sense of purpose and how it shapes the way in which you not just make sense of the world, but kind of what comes next?
Yeah. And I suppose what came into my head as you said that is the analogy that we used earlier about like the Pilates, about that core
Yeah.
alignment and core stability, you know, the outside world will tell us that the best way to be fit and healthy is to go for a run or do HIIT exercise or, you know, get our heart rates all the way up. And we can be conditioned into I'm not working out or doing good for my body unless I'm breaking a sweat and I'm, you know, doing some kind of hit, but knowing that actually the integrity, the alignment, the strength, flexibility comes from those quieter, you know, more intentional movements. I
Yeah.
think that for me is the important piece with this about um, the more I do that inner work, the more it connects me, empowers me to do the external stuff. But
Yeah.
if I don't do that, I'm either going to listen to the noise and go off in the wrong direction, or I'm not going to bring my whole self with me. So I'm
Yeah.
almost like putting on a mask to do it. So I think the purpose piece is about me being in my strength, and my strength is like my values and being in integrity with what is most important and using that as the fuel because it's more sustainable. I'm less likely to get
Yeah.
injured.
Yeah.
I just feel more myself in doing it and then bring the best of myself to it.
Yeah. Unleashed in
Mm.
a sustainable way, which I think is a
Yeah.
really incredible message for those listening here. And yeah, Nikki, I just want to thank you just for the depth of experience that you've been able to share, and you know, in what is a relatively short space of time, and kind of covering off some really significant moments in your life and how they've shaped who you are. But the level of intention and integrity, I think, is the key word that you now bring to everything that you're doing, and the way in which you're able to rely upon and trust a sense of purpose in taking you forward into the unknown, I think just has been really incredible for us all to hear and experience. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation today. It's been amazing.
Oh, you're very welcome. And as you're saying that, what I wanted to just reflect is, and I don't always do it perfectly all
Yeah,
the time, but I think what happens is when you go off course, you almost have to surrender in those moments because you realize you're off course. And it's in those moments of surrender where you go, I haven't got a clue. I don't know
yeah,
what's going on here. I've got it wrong. How do I get back on course? That that's when you do the inward connection,
yeah,
um, and trust in the feelings,
yeah.
but being able to go slow enough to be able to do that. So yeah, I hope to be in alignment and be in integrity with intention, but I don't always do that. But it's been an absolute joy to reflect and to join the dots and to have that conversation with you, James.
Um, Thank you. A brilliant, brilliant note to finish on. I just want to share something that felt really relevant. You might have seen me kind of scurrying for my phone while you were talking. That my sister yesterday sent me a message, and she just said, Shakespeare himself is on board with the excitable soul. And this quote, this Shakespeare quote, kind of really feels really relevant to what you've been describing in this conversation, which is the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away.
Oh,
So the
beautiful.
meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And if anything can sum up what you've shared with us today, it's that beautiful journey to find what was really important to you, and now your just level of motivation to share that with others and help them benefit from it. So, Nicky, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, James.
Massive thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. If you are interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your sense of purpose, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.